The elevator climbed silently through the glass tower that pierced the Dallas skyline, carrying Alexander Montgomery toward the penthouse office that had been his father's domain for over 3 decades. At 35, Alexander commanded an oil and gas empire that stretched across 3 continents, a fortune built on Texas crude and shrewd international investments that had made the Montgomery name synonymous with power in corporate America. The elevator doors opened with a whisper, revealing the familiar mahogany-paneled corridor, lined with portraits of Montgomery patriarchs, dating back to the original oil baron who had struck black gold in East Texas in 1923. Alexander's footsteps echoed against the marble floors as he made his way toward the corner office, his tailored Italian suit a stark contrast to the traditional cowboy boots that remained his only concession to Texas heritage. "Good morning, Mr. Montgomery," his secretary Victoria greeted him with the same respectful distance she had maintained for the past 8 years. No one in the Montgomery Empire dared to treat Alexander with anything less than complete deference. He had cultivated this image carefully, the untouchable businessman, the strategic mind that never allowed emotion to cloud judgment, the heir who had not only preserved his family's legacy, but expanded it beyond his father's wildest dreams. Alexander, settled behind his desk, the same desk from which his father, Samuel Montgomery, had orchestrated deals that shaped entire economies. The weight of expectation sat on his shoulders like an invisible mantle, one he had worn since childhood when his father had first explained that Montgomery men were not ordinary men. They were builders of empires, protectors of legacy, and guardians of tradition. "Your first meeting is in 20 minutes, Victoria continued, placing a stack of contracts on his desk. "The Henderson deal requires your signature, and the board meeting has been moved to 3 o'clock. Alexander nodded, his mind already shifting into the familiar rhythm of corporate warfare. The Henderson acquisition would add another $1 billion to the Montgomery portfolio, another victory in the endless game of expansion that defined his existence. Yet as he reached for his gold-plated pen, a gift from his father on his 21st birthday, something felt different about this morning. Perhaps it was the letter that had arrived the previous evening, hand-delivered to his River Oaks mansion by a private courier. The invitation to the annual Energy Innovation Summit in Houston, an event he typically avoided, but which this year promised to showcase revolutionary approaches to energy preservation and cultural heritage. The convergence of old and new, tradition and innovation, concepts that had been weighing heavily on his mind lately. At 35, Alexander had achieved everything his father had demanded of him. The Montgomery Empire was stronger than ever, their influence reaching into the highest levels of government and international commerce. Yet in the quiet moments between board meetings and merger negotiations, he found himself questioning whether this path had cost him something essential, something he couldn't quite name but felt the absence of with increasing intensity. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his father. "Board meeting agenda includes discussion of the Blackwood Alliance. Be prepared." Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Blackwood Alliance, his father's term for the arranged marriage that had been discussed in whispers for months. Senator Robert Blackwood's daughter, Catherine, was everything the Montgomery family required in a daughter-in-law. Impeccable pedigree, Harvard-educated, beautiful in that polished way that graced magazine covers, and most importantly, connected to political power that could protect and expand Montgomery interests. Alexander had met Catherine several times at various social functions. She was intelligent, well-spoken, and undeniably attractive. On paper, she was perfect. In reality, their conversations felt like carefully choreographed negotiations, each word calculated for maximum social and political impact. There was no spark, no genuine connection, just the mutual understanding that their union would benefit both families immensely. "Mr. Montgomery," Victoria's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Your father is on line 1. Alexander picked up the secure phone, knowing exactly what this conversation would entail. "Good morning, Father." "Alexander." Samuel Montgomery's voice carried the same authority at 72, that it had when Alexander was a child. "I trust you received my message about this afternoon's discussion." "I did." Alexander kept his tone neutral, professional. Years of training had taught him never to reveal his thoughts to his father until he was certain of his position. "Good. The Blackwood Alliance represents more than just a marriage, son. It's the culmination of everything we've built. Catherine will be the perfect partner for the next phase of Montgomery expansion into renewable energy and government contracts. Her father's influence in the Senate Energy Committee alone makes this union invaluable." Alexander stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city sprawling below him. Somewhere in those streets, people lived lives driven by passion, by choice, by love. The thought struck him as both foreign and intensely appealing. "I understand the business implications, Father," Alexander replied carefully. "Business implications?" Samuel's laugh was sharp. "Son, this is about legacy, about ensuring that the Montgomery name continues to command respect for generations to come. Catherine Blackwood isn't just a bride, she's an investment in our family's future." After ending the call, Alexander sat in silence for several minutes. The word investment echoed in his mind, carrying with it the weight of every decision that had brought him to this moment. His entire life had been structured around investments, in companies, in relationships, in strategic alliances that served the greater Montgomery good. When had he last made a choice based solely on what he wanted, rather than what was expected of him? The question followed him through his morning meetings, lurking beneath the surface of every handshake and signed contract. By lunch, he had made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of dining at his usual private club, he instructed his driver to take him to the Energy Innovation Summit in Houston. It was an impulsive choice, the kind of deviation from routine that his father would have questioned immediately. The drive to Houston gave Alexander time to think, something his carefully scheduled life rarely allowed. The Texas landscape blurred past his window, oil derricks standing sentinel over fields that had made his family's fortune, refineries that bore the Montgomery name, and increasingly wind farms that represented the future his father was so eager to control through political alliance. As his car pulled up to the convention center, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine curiosity about what he might discover. The summit was smaller than the major industry conferences he usually attended, focused more on innovation and cultural preservation than pure profit. It was exactly the kind of event that Samuel Montgomery would have dismissed as idealistic nonsense, which perhaps explained why Alexander found himself genuinely interested for the first time in months. The registration area buzzed with energy. That felt different from his usual business environment. These weren't just executives in expensive suits making deals over whiskey and cigars. These were inventors, researchers, artists, and preservationists, people whose work was driven by passion rather than profit margins. Alexander moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention, yet he found himself genuinely listening to conversations rather than simply networking. A presentation on sustainable energy caught his attention, but it was the speaker who truly captured his interest. Dr. Elena Vasquez, according to her bio, was a cultural preservation specialist who had developed revolutionary techniques for protecting historical artifacts while advancing clean energy initiatives. She wasn't conventionally beautiful in the way Alexander was accustomed to. There was no designer gown, no perfect makeup, no carefully styled hair. Instead, Elena possessed something far more compelling, an authentic passion that radiated from her as she spoke about preserving humanity's cultural heritage while building a sustainable future. Her intelligence was sharp and uncompromising, her dedication evident in every gesture, and her complete indifference to the wealthy men in expensive suits who populated the audience was both refreshing and intriguing. Alexander found himself genuinely absorbed in her presentation, asking questions not for political advantage, but out of actual curiosity. When she answered, her eyes met his directly, without the deference or calculation he was accustomed to seeing. In that moment, something shifted inside him. An awakening of possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. As the day progressed, Alexander discovered that Elena Vasquez represented everything his carefully controlled world was not: authentic, passionate, and completely unimpressed by wealth or status. She worked because she loved her work, not because she was building an empire. She made choices based on her values, not on strategic advantage. And when she looked at him, she saw Alexander the man, not Montgomery, the corporate dynasty. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying, opening doorways in his mind that had been sealed shut since childhood. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Montgomery found himself wanting something that couldn't be acquired through negotiation, merger, or strategic alliance. He wanted to know this woman, to understand the passion that drove her, to experience the world through eyes unclouded by the weight of legacy and expectation. The summit was scheduled to conclude with an evening gala, and Alexander made another impulsive decision that would have shocked his father. Instead of returning to Dallas for his scheduled dinner with potential investors, he decided to stay. As the sun set over Houston, casting golden light through the convention center windows, Alexander Montgomery prepared to step into territory that was completely foreign to him, the realm of genuine human connection, where success couldn't be measured in dollars and where the outcome was anything but guaranteed. The evening gala transformed the convention center into something magical. Soft lighting cast warm shadows across displays of restored artifacts and innovative energy solutions, creating an atmosphere that felt more like an art gallery than a business function. Alexander had attended hundreds of similar events, but this felt different, more intimate, more purposeful, more real. He moved through the crowd with uncharacteristic uncertainty, his usual confidence replaced by something he couldn't quite identify. For the first time in decades, he wasn't working a room for strategic advantage. He was simply present, aware of his surroundings in a way that felt almost foreign. "Mr. Montgomery," a voice interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to find Elena Vasquez approaching with 2 glasses of wine. "I noticed you seemed interested in the cultural preservation aspect of our work earlier. I thought you might like to see some of the actual pieces we've restored." Alexander accepted the wine, noting how her fingers brushed his briefly, a contact that sent an unexpected jolt through him. "I'd be honored, Dr. Vasquez, though I have to admit, I'm more familiar with extracting resources from the earth than preserving what's already here." Elena smiled, and Alexander realized it was the first completely genuine smile he'd seen directed at him in years. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones that have been here all along. We just need to learn how to see them differently. Chiseau led him to a corner display featuring artifacts from various Native American tribes, pottery, textiles, and ceremonial objects that had been carefully restored using techniques that Elena had developed. As she explained her work, Alexander found himself drawn not just to her expertise, but to the passion that animated her every word. "This piece," she said, indicating a beautifully restored Pueblo pottery vessel, "was nearly destroyed by improper storage. But look at it now. The patterns tell the story of a people's relationship with the land, their understanding of sustainable living that we're only beginning to appreciate." Alexander studied the intricate designs, seeing them through Elena's eyes. "How long have you been doing this work?" "Since I was a child, really. My grandmother was a curator at the Museum of the American Indian in New York. She taught me that every artifact carries the soul of the people who created it. When we preserve these pieces, we're not just saving objects, we're saving stories, wisdom, ways of understanding the world that modern society has largely forgotten." As Elena spoke, Alexander felt something awakening within him that had been dormant for so long, he'd forgotten it existed. It was curiosity, but more than that, it was a genuine interest in something beyond profit margins and market dominance. This woman had dedicated her life to preserving the past while building a better future, and she did it with a passion that made his own accomplishments feel hollow by comparison. "And the energy work?" he asked, genuinely curious rather than merely polite. "It's all connected," Elena explained, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. Traditional communities understood sustainability in ways we're only rediscovering. My work combines traditional preservation techniques with modern renewable energy systems to create museum environments that are both culturally sensitive and environmentally responsible. Alexander found himself drawn deeper into conversation with Elena, discovering a world of ideas and possibilities he had never considered. She challenged him without being confrontational, questioned his assumptions without being judgmental, and shared her vision of a future that balanced progress with respect for heritage. "What about you, Mr. Montgomery?" Elena asked as they strolled through the display area. "What drives you? Beyond the obvious business success, I mean." The question caught Alexander off guard. No one had asked him what drove him in years. Everyone assumed they knew: money, power, legacy. But standing here with Elena, those answers felt inadequate. "I'm not sure I know anymore," he admitted, the honesty surprising him as much as it seemed to surprise her. "I've spent so many years fulfilling expectations, building on what my father created, that I'm not sure I remember what I actually want." Elena stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "That's the saddest thing I've heard all evening. You have the resources to do anything, be anything, and you don't know what you want." "Freedom isn't always a luxury that comes with wealth," Alexander replied, and immediately regretted the admission. He'd never voiced that thought to anyone, barely acknowledged it to himself. "Freedom is always a choice," Elena said softly. "It's just that some choices are harder to make than others." They continued talking as the evening progressed, moving from the crowded main hall to a quieter terrace overlooking the Houston skyline. The city lights twinkled below them, a reminder of the world Alexander commanded. But for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about market share or quarterly projections. "Tell me about your family," Elena said, settling onto a bench facing the view. Alexander hesitated, then found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone in years. His mother, who had passed away when he was 12, leaving him alone with a father who viewed emotion as weakness. His childhood spent in boarding schools and summer camps designed to mold him into the perfect Montgomery heir, the weight of expectation that had shaped every major decision of his life. "And now?" Elena asked. "What does your father expect from you now?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "Marriage, to someone who will advance the family's political connections, someone who understands the game and can play it as well as I can." "And what do you want?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Alexander wasn't sure he was ready to confront. What did he want? Standing here with Elena, breathing in the warm Houston air and feeling more alive than he had in years, the answer was becoming clearer with each passing minute. "I want to know what it feels like to make a choice based on what I need rather than what's expected of me," he said finally. Elena studied his face in the soft light. "And what do you need, Alexander Montgomery?" The use of his first name, spoken with such gentle directness, sent another jolt through him. "I need to understand what you see when you look at me, because I don't think it's what most people see." "When I look at you," Elena said slowly, "I see someone who has everything and nothing at the same time. Someone who has been so busy being what others need him to be that he's forgotten who he actually is." The observation was more perceptive than anything Alexander had heard from therapists, business consultants, or the countless advisors who surrounded him. Elena saw him, not the Montgomery name, not the corporate empire, not the strategic alliance potential, but him. "And what do you see when you look at yourself?" he asked, genuinely curious about this woman who seemed so comfortable in her own skin. "I see someone who chose a different path," Elena replied. "Someone who decided early on that living authentically was more important than living comfortably. It's not always easy, but it's always honest." As the evening wound down, Alexander found himself reluctant to leave. Every conversation with Elena revealed new layers, new perspectives that challenged his worldview. She spoke about her work with such passion, about her commitment to preserving cultural heritage while building sustainable futures, that he found himself envying her sense of purpose. "I should go," Elena said eventually, glancing at her watch. Early flight back to Santa Fe tomorrow. Santa Fe, Alexander repeated, filing away the information. Your home? For now. I have a small studio there where I do my restoration work. It's quiet, peaceful, good for thinking. Alexander wanted to ask more questions, to extend the evening, to find reasons to keep talking. Instead, he did something that surprised them both. He asked for her number. I'd like to continue this conversation, he said, his usual confidence replaced by something more tentative. If you're willing. Eleanor smiled, but there was something cautious in her expression. I have a feeling that continuing this conversation might be complicated for both of us. The best conversations usually are, Alexander replied. As Elena wrote her number on a business card, Alexander felt a shift in his chest, a loosening of something that had been tight for so long he'd forgotten it was there. When their fingers touched as she handed him the card, he felt a connection that was unlike anything he'd experienced with the perfectly suitable women his father had introduced him to over the years. Alexander, Eleanor said softly, I need you to understand something. I'm not impressed by wealth or power. I'm not looking for someone to take care of me or elevate my status. I'm looking for someone who knows who they are and isn't afraid to be that person. And if I'm not sure who that person is yet, then maybe it's time to find out. As Elena walked away, Alexander remained on the terrace, staring out at the city lights and feeling something he hadn't experienced since childhood. Hope. Not the calculated optimism of a successful business deal, but genuine hope for possibilities he couldn't yet define. The drive back to Dallas passed in a blur of thoughts and sensations. Alexander found himself replaying every moment of the evening, every word Elena had spoken, every glance they had shared. By the time he reached his River Oaks mansion, he had made a decision that would have shocked his father. He was going to call Elena Vasquez, and he was going to be honest about what he was feeling. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Montgomery was going to choose want over should, desire over duty, and authentic connection over strategic advantage. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating, opening a door to possibilities he had never allowed himself to imagine. The weeks following the Houston summit passed in a blur of secret phone calls and stolen moments. Alexander found himself doing something he had never done before, living a double life. During the day, he maintained his role as the dutiful Montgomery heir, attending board meetings, negotiating deals, and preparing for the increasingly frequent discussions about his future with Catherine Blackwood. But in the evenings, he would retreat to his study and call Elena. Their conversations stretched for hours, covering everything from art and culture to philosophy and dreams. Elena shared stories of her restoration work, of pieces she had saved from destruction, of the deep satisfaction that came from preserving beauty for future generations. Alexander found himself opening up about his own dreams, dreams he had buried so deeply under family expectations that he had forgotten they existed. I used to want to be an architect, he admitted during one late-night call, surprising himself with the confession. I had this vision of building things that would last for centuries, creating beauty instead of just extracting resources. What stopped you? Eleanor's voice was gentle, encouraging. My father. He said Montgomery men didn't play with buildings, they owned them. That architecture was for dreamers, not empire builders. And you believed him? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. I was 18. He was the most powerful man I knew. What else was I supposed to believe? You could believe in yourself, Elena said softly. It's not too late, Alexander. You're 35, not 95. You have the resources to do anything you want. It's not that simple, Alexander replied, but even as he said it, he wondered if it actually was that simple. Had he been making his life more complicated than it needed to be? Their relationship deepened with each conversation, each shared thought, each moment of genuine connection. Alexander found himself falling in love for the first time in his life, not with an idea of what love should be, but with the reality of Elena's intelligence, passion, and unwavering authenticity. But their secret couldn't remain hidden forever. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Alexander had just finished a particularly satisfying call with Elena when his father's secretary called to inform him that Samuel Montgomery was on his way up to the office. Alexander barely had time to compose himself before his father strode through the door, his expression thunderous. "Sit down, Alexander," Samuel commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had intimidated oil executives and politicians for decades. Alexander remained standing, something defiant stirring in his chest. "I prefer to stand, Father." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "You prefer? Since when do you have preferences that conflict with Montgomery family business? What are you talking about? Don't play innocent with me, son. I know about your little friendship with the museum curator from Santa Fe, Elena Vasquez, isn't it?" Alexander's blood ran cold. How do I know?" Samuel's laugh was harsh. "Son, I've been protecting Montgomery interests for 50 years. Did you really think you could carry on a relationship without my knowledge? Especially one that threatens everything we've built." The word threatens hit Alexander like a physical blow. Elena doesn't threaten anything. She's a respected professional, an expert in her field. "She's a distraction," Samuel cut him off. "A romantic fantasy that's keeping you from your real responsibilities. The Blackwood Alliance is crucial to our expansion into renewable energy markets. Catherine's father controls key Senate committees that could make or break our next decade of growth. And what about what I want?" Alexander's voice rose, years of suppressed rebellion finally finding expression. "What you want?" Samuel's voice was incredulous. "Son, you are the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. What you want is a luxury you can't afford. What you need is a wife who can help you preserve and expand that empire." "Catherine Blackwood doesn't love me any more than I love her," Alexander said, the words tasting like truth on his tongue. "We're both playing roles in a script you and her father wrote." Love. Samuel's expression shifted to something between pity and disgust. "Alexander, I'm disappointed. I thought I had raised you better than this. Love is a fairy tale invented by people who don't have real responsibilities. Marriage is a business partnership, nothing more, nothing less." "Is that what you had with Mother?" Alexander asked, his voice quiet but steady. For the first time in the conversation, Samuel hesitated. "Your mother understood her role. She understood that Montgomery wives support their husband's work. They don't distract from it. She also understood that you never really loved her," Alexander said, and the words hung in the air like an accusation. Samuel's face flushed red. "That's enough. You will end this foolishness with the Vasquez woman immediately. You will propose to Catherine Blackwood by the end of the month, and you will marry her by Christmas. This conversation is over." "No," Alexander said, the word coming out stronger than he felt. "This conversation is just beginning." But Samuel had already turned and walked out, leaving Alexander alone with the weight of his defiance and the consequences it would surely bring. That evening, Alexander drove to the Montgomery family estate in Highland Park, the mansion where he had grown up feeling more like a guest than a son. He needed to think, to process what had happened, to figure out how to move forward without losing everything he had worked for while still preserving the part of himself that Elena had awakened. The estate was quiet, most of the staff having gone home for the evening. Alexander walked through the halls lined with portraits of Montgomery ancestors, each one a reminder of the legacy he was expected to uphold. In his father's study, he found Samuel waiting for him, 2 glasses of aged whiskey already poured. "Sit," Samuel said, his tone more controlled than it had been that morning. Alexander took the offered glass but remained standing. "If you're going to threaten me again—" "I'm not going to threaten you," Samuel interrupted. "I'm going to tell you the truth about the Blackwood Alliance, about why it's so important, and about what's really at stake here." Despite himself, Alexander was intrigued. His father rarely shared strategic information without a specific purpose. "The energy sector is changing faster than we anticipated," Samuel began. "The political winds are shifting toward renewable energy, and companies that don't adapt will be left behind. The Blackwood connection isn't just useful, it's essential for our survival." We have billions in reserves, Alexander protested. We could pivot to renewables without political help. Money isn't everything, son. Influence is. And Catherine, Blackwood represents influence we can't buy. Her father chairs the Senate Energy Committee. Her godfather is the Secretary of the Interior. Her network includes every major player in the renewable energy space. Alexander sipped his whiskey, processing this information. And what about Elena? Samuel's expression hardened. What about her? You investigated her. What did you find? I found exactly what I expected to find. A woman with no useful connections, no family wealth, no political influence. A woman who would contribute nothing to Montgomery interests except emotional complications. That's not what I meant, Alexander said quietly. Samuel studied his son's face. You're in love with her. It wasn't a question, and Alexander didn't treat it as one. Yes. Then you're a fool. Samuel's voice was matter-of-fact rather than angry. But you're my fool, and I won't let you destroy everything we've built over a romantic fantasy. It's not a fantasy, Alexander said. It's the first real thing I've felt in my entire adult life. Real things don't always survive in the real world, Samuel replied. You have a choice to make, Alexander. You can choose love, lose everything, and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. Or you can choose responsibility, marry Catherine, and build something lasting. Alexander set down his glass and walked to the window overlooking the meticulously maintained gardens. There's a third option, which is, I could choose both, marry Catherine for the family, but keep Elena for myself. Samuel's silence stretched for so long that Alexander turned to look at him. His father's expression was unreadable. That's not the Montgomery way, Samuel said finally. Maybe it's time for a new Montgomery way. The conversation ended there, but Alexander knew it was far from over. As he drove back to his own house, he made two decisions that would change everything. First, he would call Elena and tell her the truth about his situation. Second, he would begin investigating his options, both for the family business and for his personal life. What he didn't know was that his investigation would uncover secrets that would shake the very foundations of everything he thought he knew about the Montgomery legacy, about Elena Vasquez, and about the true nature of the forces that had been shaping his life from the beginning. The phone rang as he pulled into his driveway. Elena's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment Alexander hesitated. Once he answered this call, once he told her the truth about his father's demands and his own impossible position, there would be no going back. He answered the call. Alexander, is everything okay? You sound different. Elena, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to reveal. We need to talk. The conversation with Elena lasted until dawn. Alexander told her everything, about his father's ultimatum, about Catherine Blackwood, about the political alliances that supposedly made their relationship impossible. He expected her to be hurt, angry, or at least surprised. Instead, Elena's response was quietly devastating. I know, she said simply. You know what? I know about Catherine Blackwood. I know about your father's expectations. I know about the Montgomery Empire and what it requires of you. Alexander felt the ground shifting beneath him. How could you possibly know all that? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Because I know more about the Montgomery family than you might think, Alexander. My full name is Elena Vasquez Montgomery. The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. That's impossible. My grandmother wasn't just a museum curator, Elena continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. She was Maria Vasquez Montgomery, your grandfather's first wife. Alexander's mind raced, trying to process this information. His first stop was the Montgomery family archives, located in the basement of the Highland Park estate. If Elena's story was true, there would be records, documents, photographs, evidence of the first marriage that had been carefully hidden from family history. It took hours of searching through dusty file cabinets and forgotten storage boxes, but Alexander finally found what he was looking for. In a sealed envelope marked RM Personal Confidential, He discovered correspondence between his grandfather and a lawyer, detailing payments made to Maria Vasquez in exchange for her agreement to leave Dallas and never contact the Montgomery family again. The letters painted a picture that made Alexander sick to his stomach. Maria had been genuinely in love with Robert Montgomery, and he with her. But family pressure, social expectations, and racial prejudices of the 1940s had forced them apart. The payments weren't just hush money, they were compensation for a woman whose life had been destroyed by Montgomery ambition. There were photographs too. Maria Vasquez had been beautiful, with the same intelligent eyes and strong features that Alexander recognized in Elena. In one photo, she was clearly pregnant, her hand resting protectively on her belly. On the back, someone had written, Maria, 1943 in his grandfather's handwriting. Alexander spent the rest of the night reading through the documents, piecing together a story that his family had spent decades trying to erase. When he finally emerged from the archives, dawn was breaking again, and he knew exactly what he had to do. His first call was to his lawyer. I need you to research something for me, Alexander said. I need to know about legitimacy laws in Texas in the 1940s, and I need to know about inheritance rights for children born to legally married parents. The answer came back faster than Alexander had expected. Maria Vasquez had been legally married to Robert Montgomery. Their child, Elena's father, had been a legitimate heir to the Montgomery fortune. The family had not only betrayed Maria, they had stolen Elena's birthright. Armed with this knowledge, Alexander made his second call. Elena, I need to see you. There are things you need to know, documents you need to see. Can you come to Dallas? Alexander, I don't think that's a good idea. Please, he interrupted, trust me one more time. I think I've found a way to make things right. Eleanor arrived 2 days later, and Alexander met her at the airport personally, something that raised eyebrows among his security team. She looked tired, wary, and heartbreakingly beautiful. As they drove through Dallas toward the Montgomery estate, Alexander explained what he had discovered in the family archives. Elena, your grandmother was legally married to my grandfather. Your father was a legitimate Montgomery heir. You are a legitimate Montgomery heir. Elena stared at him in shock. What are you saying? I'm saying that legally, morally, and in every way that matters, you have as much right to the Montgomery name and fortune as I do. Maybe more, considering how your family was treated. They spent hours in the estate's library, going through the documents Alexander had found. Eleanor studied the photographs of her grandmother with tears in her eyes, seeing her family's history, laid out in ways she had never imagined. She never told us, Elena whispered, holding a letter her grandmother had written to Robert Montgomery, begging him to acknowledge their child. She never told us we were Montgomerys. She was protecting you, Alexander said softly. She knew what this family was capable of. As they talked, Alexander outlined the plan he had been developing. I want to make this right, Elena. I want to acknowledge what happened to your family, and I want to make sure you receive what should have been yours all along. Alexander, I don't want your money. It's not my money, he corrected. It's your money. It always was. That evening, Alexander took Elena to dinner at the most exclusive restaurant in Dallas, a public declaration that sent shockwaves through the city's social circles. But he didn't care about the whispers or the scandalized looks. He cared about the woman sitting across from him and about finally doing something right. There's something else I need to tell you, Alexander said as dessert arrived. Tomorrow night, my father is hosting a dinner party. The Blackwoods will be there, and he's expecting me to propose to Catherine. Elena's face fell. Alexander, I'm not going to propose to Catherine, he continued. Instead, I'm going to tell everyone the truth about us, about your family's history, about what the Montgomery name really means. You can't do that, Elena protested. You'll lose everything. I'll lose the things that don't matter, Alexander corrected. The empire built on lies and betrayal, the relationships based on strategic advantage, the life lived according to someone else's script. But I'll keep the things that do matter. Which are you? Alexander said simply. The chance to build something real, something honest, something that would make your grandmother proud rather than ashamed. The dinner party the next evening was exactly the kind of event the Montgomery family excelled at, perfectly orchestrated, strategically planned, designed to cement alliances and advance interests. Catherine Blackwood arrived looking stunning in a designer gown, every inch the perfect political wife. Senator Blackwood worked the room with practiced ease, and Samuel Montgomery held court like the oil baron he was. Alexander waited until dessert was served, and all attention was focused on him. Then he stood, raising his wine glass as if to make a toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the dining room, "I have an announcement to make." Samuel Montgomery's eyes narrowed, sensing that this was not the announcement he had orchestrated. For too long, the Montgomery family has built its success on strategic alliances rather than authentic relationships, Alexander continued. "We've prioritized business over truth, convenience over justice, and tradition over what's right." The room had gone completely silent. Catherine Blackwood looked confused, Senator Blackwood looked concerned, and Samuel Montgomery looked furious. "Tonight, I want to correct a historical injustice," Alexander said, his eyes finding Elena in the back of the room where she waited with the household staff as they had planned. "Elena Vasquez, would you please join me?" As Elena walked through the dining room toward Alexander, whispers erupted around the table. She looked magnificent in the simple black dress they had chosen together, not trying to compete with the designer gowns around her, but standing out through sheer authenticity. "This is Elena Vasquez Montgomery," Alexander announced, taking her hand as she reached him. "She is the granddaughter of Maria Vasquez, who was legally married to my grandfather Robert Montgomery in 1943. She is a legitimate Montgomery heir, and more importantly, she is the woman I love." The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and overwhelming. Samuel Montgomery rose from his chair, his face purple with rage. Senator Blackwood looked like he was calculating political damage. Catherine Blackwood simply looked relieved, as if a burden she hadn't wanted to carry had been lifted from her shoulders. "Alexander, sit down immediately," Samuel commanded. "No, Father," Alexander replied calmly. "I'm done sitting down. I'm done following scripts written by men who mistake power for strength and tradition for wisdom." He turned to address the room. The Montgomery Empire was built partially on the betrayal of Elena's grandmother, who was paid to disappear rather than acknowledged. As family, that betrayal ends tonight. "Alexander," Samuel's voice was a roar, "you are making the biggest mistake of your life." "No, Father," Alexander replied, his voice steady and sure. "I'm correcting the biggest mistake of yours." The evening ended in chaos, with guests leaving in scandalized whispers and Samuel Montgomery retreating to his study in defeat. But Alexander felt lighter than he had in years. Standing in the empty dining room with Elena, surrounded by the remnants of a party that had been meant to celebrate his capitulation to family expectations, he felt free. "Are you sure about this?" Elena asked, her voice soft with concern. "You've given up everything." "I've given up everything that was keeping me from being happy," Alexander corrected. "There's a difference." 6 months later, Alexander and Elena stood in a small chapel in Santa Fe, exchanging vows that were based on love rather than strategic advantage. The guest list was small: Elena's extended family, a few genuine friends, and surprisingly, Catherine Blackwood, who had become an unexpected ally in Alexander's efforts to reform Montgomery business practices. Samuel Montgomery did not attend, but he had not disowned his son either. The Montgomery Empire continued, though under Alexander's leadership, it began to focus more on renewable energy and cultural preservation, projects that combined business success with social responsibility. Alexander never regretted his choice. Building a life with Elena, creating a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love, felt like the first real thing he had ever done. Together, they established the Maria Vasquez Montgomery Foundation, dedicated to preserving cultural heritage and supporting communities that had been marginalized by historical injustices. As Alexander watched Elena work on a particularly challenging restoration project in their shared studio, He marveled at how different his life looked from what he had imagined a year ago. He was still wealthy, still influential, still capable of building and creating on a grand scale. But now those activities served purposes larger than mere profit, and they were shared with someone who challenged him to be better than he had ever thought possible. "Any regrets?" Elena asked, looking up from the Navajo textile she was carefully repairing. Alexander considered the question seriously, as he had learned to consider all of Elena's questions. A year ago he would have answered automatically, dismissively. Now he thought about the empire he had walked away from, the easy path he had abandoned, the approval he had forfeited. "None," he said finally, and meant it completely. The Montgomery. Name endured, but it endured with honor restored and justice acknowledged, and Alexander Montgomery finally understood what his grandfather had lost when he chose family pressure over authentic love, and what he himself had gained by making the opposite choice. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Alexander and Elena's story has moved you deeply. Love that challenges us to become better versions of ourselves. Courage that stands up to tradition when tradition serves injustice, and the power of choosing authenticity over convenience. These are themes that resonate in all our lives. If this story touched your heart, we have an entire collection of equally captivating tales waiting for you. Click the link to your left to discover our special playlist featuring stories of love, redemption, and the courage to choose what's right over what's easy. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Your support helps us bring you these transformative stories every single day. We've crafted each tale to explore the beautiful complexity of human relationships and the moments that define who we truly are. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing how these stories connect with your own experiences. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest inheritance we can claim is the courage to write our own story, rather than living someone else's script. See you in the comments. Grandfather Robert Montgomery had been married twice. First, to a woman who had left Dallas suddenly in the 1940s, then to his grandmother Eleanor, Samuel's mother. The first marriage was rarely discussed in family circles, dismissed as a youthful mistake. Maria Vasquez was pregnant when she left Dallas. Elena continued, "She was carrying your grandfather's child, my father. But the Montgomery family couldn't accept a Mexican-American wife, especially not during that era. They paid her to disappear, to never contact the family again, to never claim her rightful place as a Montgomery. Elena, that's..." Alexander struggled to find words. "Even if that's true, it was 80 years ago. It has nothing to do with us." "Doesn't it?" Elena's voice carried a weight of pain that Alexander had never heard before. "My family lost everything, Alexander. Not just money or status, but identity, heritage, the right to be acknowledged as part of something larger. My grandmother spent her entire life fighting to preserve other people's cultural heritage because hers had been stolen from her." Alexander felt sick. The Montgomery fortune, the empire he had inherited, had been built partially on the betrayal of Elena's grandmother. "Elena, I had no idea. If I had known..." "What would you have done?" Elena asked. "Would you have acknowledged the injustice? Would you have tried to make amends? Or would you have done exactly what your family has always done, protected Montgomery interests above all else?" The question hung between them unanswered, because Alexander wasn't sure he knew the answer. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" he asked. "Because I wanted to see who you really are. I wanted to know if you were different from the men who came before you, or if you were just another Montgomery willing to sacrifice anything and anyone for the family empire." "So, and what did you discover?" "I discovered that I fell in love with you anyway," Elena said softly. "Despite everything. Despite knowing that loving you meant loving the heir to everything my family lost." The irony was almost too much to bear. Alexander had fallen in love with the one woman who had every reason to hate his family, and she had fallen in love with him, despite that history. "What do we do now?" Alexander asked. "I don't know," Elena admitted, "but I think you have some decisions to make that go beyond just choosing between me and Catherine Blackwood." After ending the call, Alexander sat in his study as the sun rose over Dallas, trying, to reconcile everything he thought he knew with the truth Elena had revealed. The Montgomery empire had been built on more than just oil and smart investments. It had been built on betrayal, on the systematic erasure of people who didn't fit the family's vision of itself. He thought about his conversations with Elena over the past weeks, about her passion for preserving cultural heritage, about her commitment to justice and authenticity. Now he understood where that passion came from. It was personal in ways he had never imagined. The day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls that Alexander handled on autopilot, while his mind worked through the implications of Elena's